So we are Nosh, and we are building a restaurant-owned food delivery alternative to third-party food delivery marketplaces like DoorDash, Grubhub, and Uber Eats. And my name is Mike Perhats. I'm the CEO of Nosh, and my co-founder Gleidson is the COO. We both previously started separate food delivery companies and came together to build Nosh in Colorado because we realized that there isn't really a single restaurant in the entire world that likes working with these third-party marketplace products. These companies charge outrageous 30% fees and destroy a restaurant's margin. What's typically good for the incumbent is typically really bad for the restaurant, and you get this really strong negative network effect where restaurants leave these marketplaces to essentially go to the next one offering the better incentive. So 70% of net revenues for DoorDash are spent on sales and marketing. Gleidson and I thought that there had to be a better way to run a food delivery network. So we built a restaurant-owned cooperative version that was owned by the restaurants, and this is working extremely well for us. So since the first 4 months in market, we were profitable. We've since grown to over 40% restaurant exclusivity in Northern Colorado. So these are restaurants that do not use Uber Eats, do not use DoorDash, do not use Grubhub. They only use Nosh. 100% of our restaurants are onboarded by existing restaurants. So what is otherwise the most expensive thing for incumbent platforms, 70% of net revenues going into sales and marketing, costs us exactly $0 because our restaurants are our sales team. So when we bootstrapped our market, we launched the first 100 restaurants in 7 days. As a counterpoint, that might take DoorDash 7 days to onboard a single restaurant. So we have about 100x improvement in go-to-market speeds and supply-side acquisition. And we've been doing over $1 million in revenue for the last couple of years, and restaurants are obsessed with us. This is the best thing that an independent restaurant could get when delivery is growing significantly, even after the pandemic. So we've been wondering how we scale user-owned networks. We get reached out to all the time by restaurants across the country and have always had a challenge in actually capturing the demand for the service. We think that bringing our cooperative model on chain unlocks a lot of unique ways to distribute value to users for their unique contributions to the network, and extending ownership and aligning incentives between the restaurants and the customers represents a really unique opportunity. We think that if we're able to scale this, we will be the first widely adopted consumer application in Web3. And we've been working this summer on a novel legal framework to essentially launch token networks in the US. And if you're interested in collaborating or talking to us about that, you can contact me at Mike at Nosh Delivery, or contact me on Telegram at Perhats. And we're also hiring a distributed systems engineer right now. And happy to take questions.
Great. Thanks, Mike. We have a bunch of questions for you. So first one, the existing delivery networks have very strong network effects. Are there particular geographies or markets that you think are particularly vulnerable for Nosh to go after to kind of break those network effects?
Yeah, so we chip away with the primary thing is like restaurants are very eager to have an alternative to these third-party services. A restaurant's typical margin is about 12 to 17% of food costs, and DoorDash, Grubhub, Uber Eats charge independent restaurants about 30%. And they have no control over the data that goes through those systems. So restaurants are eager to build an alternative. We get inbound, really, we're being pulled into new markets. So we're not really identifying the new markets ourselves. We get contacted by restaurants who are like, you please bring Nosh to our market? And they essentially do the work of breaking the incumbent network effects themselves. If you walk down the street in Fort Collins, Colorado, you will see like 4 foot by 4 foot signs of Nosh everywhere that just restaurants are plastering. And then once we represent a significant enough of a restaurant's delivery sales, they trigger an exclusivity event with Nosh, and we start migrating consumers over. So it's really we work hand in hand with restaurants to break the network effects. And that's worked really well in 3 markets for us.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So Scott Heiferman asked, "Why are restaurants recruiting other restaurants? Because of ownership? That's amazing. What have you
They
learned
get
from that?"
dividends. Yeah, so they collectively own the network, and as the network becomes more successful, their dividend payment it gets higher. And this is actually the unique thing that we think crypto unlocks for us is to date, restaurants have just recruited restaurants by virtue of like the narrative, and they want to build an alternative together with restaurants. So they've just given their friends phone calls to say, "Hey, we're working with Nosh. This is like our new delivery service that we own." And that works really well. And we didn't even distribute an economic incentive for them to do that sales process. And that's the most expensive thing for DoorDash is the sales and marketing. So we just completely cut that out by virtue of being decentralized and extending ownership to the restaurants.
Very cool. Someone anonymously asked, "Why is the Web3 component necessary for Nosh? What's the added value of leveraging Web3 technology for Nosh and its users?"
Yeah, I think the like permissionless onboarding is something like cryptographically verifying transactions at scale and not like distributed systems is something that's only possible with this technology. And token distributions allow us to programmatically distribute incentives and find like game theoretically optimal incentive distribution strategies for new markets. For example, in Northern Colorado, it might be really easy to recruit drivers, but in other places it might be really difficult to recruit drivers. A crypto economic system can learn the optimal distribution function for the unique networks relative to what's difficult or not in those markets, and that's better to be decentralized.
Got it. Stefan Delaveau asked, "What does retention look like so far?"
With restaurants, or I guess I'll answer kind of across the board. Restaurants only leave Nosh, really. There's been like a couple of cases where restaurants just decided to do their own first party delivery and not work with any network. So that's happened. But most restaurants stay with us unless they close. So we've had a couple restaurants shut down. That's just kind of the nature of the industry. It's perfectly competitive industry. But we have extremely strong retention on the restaurant side and on the consumer side too. And the consumer side retention is really because most of your favorite restaurants in Colorado are only available on Nosh. So if you want to eat there for delivery, there's only one place to go.
Got it. One more question. So what has been the experience of describing Web3 components of the business? Like, is there some sort of educational barrier that you imagine you'll have to kind of cross? How do you imagine overcoming that?
Yeah, we just say we largely articulate this as restaurants getting the equivalent of an employee stock option where they own the network collectively, and we don't really articulate like what the unit of value is. So it's just like you own a share in this network. Here's what that share does for you. It gets you better fees, gives you better placement in the marketplace, and here's the product that allows you to essentially interface with us and use those shares however you see fit. So we're really saying that it's like a share in the network more than we are saying it's a token. And when we articulate to restaurants that this is a mechanism for them to own the decisions about the network, they don't really need much more selling or learning. They pretty much just sign up.
Got it. Makes sense. I'm going to do one last final question for you. How are delivery workers coordinated and hired? Any opportunity to unionize delivery workers and draw them away from competitors? This was asked by Jonathan.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So most delivery drivers are treated as sort of disposable resources by the incumbent platforms. Delivery drivers are treated horribly. We think that these things are better served at the local level where there's this sort of community of drivers. Our driver retention is significantly higher than the incumbent platforms. And most of our drivers are just recruited by existing drivers. We have sort of this like local community of drivers that gets together. They have meetups. And most of our drivers, once they start driving for Nosh, do not continue driving for the other platforms. We're very transparent on fees, fair pay, that type of thing. Specifically on unionizing the drivers, that's not something that we've like invested any time or resources into, but I think there are unique things to explore. And Jonathan, you should reach out and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, thanks so much, Mike.